The planet is on a healing path from coronavirus. Vaccination against COVID-19 has begun around the world. The best virologists promise to bring people back to normal reality. What's happening now in different countries? Where quarantine has become a way of life? When can we breathe again without masks? All this in the Stopcovid program. The scandal around the British-Swedish vaccine continues to grow in the world. Cases of deaths and thrombosis are already counted in the tens. While the World Health Organization denies a link between vaccinations and cardiovascular disease, European scientists have shown that thrombosis and painful blood clotting may be a rare body reaction to the drug. Most of the EU, as well as the US, have so far suspended the use of the drug and have already stated that there is no need for it. But it's already clear that the rates of vaccination are significantly behind the set plan. Turkey is putting a special hope on vaccinations. These days, the country is in the most deplorable state compared to almost the entire world, with 40 to 50,000 infections registered per day. Most of it is already a mutated strain of the coronavirus. Now, a number of countries, including Russia, are ready to temporarily close their borders with the country. Turkey itself is also considering the option of a lockdown during the holy month of Ramadan.
На сегодняшний день Турция переживает третью волну пандемии.
Today, Turkey is experiencing the third wave of the pandemic. This time, the virus hit the country much harder than in winter or even last spring, when it all began. About 40,000 new infections per day are recorded in the country. This dramatic deterioration of the situation led to new restrictive measures. The country has imposed a curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. on weekdays. On weekends, you can leave the house only to the nearest grocery store, while the sale of any alcoholic beverages was prohibited.
И субботу и воскресенье запретили продажу спиртных напитков.
Out of 85 million people who live in Turkey, 3.5 million have managed to become infected with COVID-19. Despite the frightening numbers, life has not left the streets of Turkish cities. Markets are still open here. Apart from weekends, fast food is sold on the streets and prayers are held in mosques. Universities hold studies online. Everything except medical ones. Future doctors are now also actively participating in the fight against coronavirus. Schools, lyceums, and additional educational institutions love the right to choose the format of education for parents. Many people choose to stay at home.
Şimdi pandemi benim için çok büyük bir fırsat.
The pandemic opened up new opportunities for me because before it, I did not have time to work on myself, to develop.
Kendimi geliştirmek, başka insanlara.
A year ago, Nafi Belenli taught different languages, English, German, and Russian. While the number of infections grew in the country, the number of students in his class decreased. The retiree did not transfer his school to the online format. At 73, it's not so easy. Instead, he began to study himself.
Başlayayım mı? Tamamını öğrendim. Hangi padişahın, hangi karakter.
Along with the foreign languages that I speak, I began to study the history of Turkey more deeply. I watched a lot of videos and read a lot of literature about the Ottoman Empire, what character trait did different padishahs have, what kind of struggle they fought. And it was during this period that I found myself.
Fırsat oldu. Belki bir daha böyle bir boşluk bulunmayacaktı.
Many of Nafi's colleagues also decided to temporarily leave teaching, mainly due to technical problems. Those who managed to quickly adapt to new conditions now, on the contrary, are in extreme demand. Ludmila also belongs to the latter. She managed to significantly expand the geography of her educational center services, but traditional education is now in complete decline, says the teacher.
Например, я еще преподаю в университете, где большие группы. И там однозначно качество страдает.
I also teach at the university where there are large groups, and due to that, the quality suffers, but we have no other option. It got worse because someone does not have a good internet connection at home, someone is busy with another projects. Students miss classes, the group is too big, it's impossible to ask everyone. It became worse. But if these are small groups in the coursework system, I cannot say that the quality has suffered. Much depends on the motivation of the students and the professionalism of the teachers.
Зависит от мотивации студентов, ну и от профессионализма, конечно, преподавателей. С начала пандемии в Турцию у каждого гражданина.
In Turkey, since the beginning of the pandemic, every citizen and foreigner temporarily residing here has their own personal HES code. It stands for Hayat Eve Sigar. Life is possible at home. This is a personal number that allows you to track the movement of people. They check and ask for the HES code at the entrance to banks, hospitals, post offices, shopping centers, museums, for movement on intercity transport and domestic flights.
Внутренних авиарейсах.
You can get the HES code through a special application on your phone through the eDevlet public service system or simply by sending a text to 2023 number. Tourists may need the code to visit attractions, shopping centers, and to check into hotels or hostels. For intercity transfers within Turkey by bus, train, or ferry, the code is also required. To receive it, a foreigner must fill out a special form, print it out, or save it on the phone 72 hours before leaving to Turkey.
Для туристов страна была открыта и в прошлом.
The country was open to tourists both last summer and now. To fly to Turkey, you need a negative PCR test. Travelers from countries where the British strain of coronavirus is progressing, the UK, Denmark, South Africa, and Brazil will still have a 2-week quarantine with self-isolation. In addition, all applicable restrictions apply to tourists.
Действующие ограничения, которые обязательны для граждан Турции.
The hotel and restaurant businesses have suffered the most in Turkey. While the country barely closed to vacationers, tourism revenues fell 65% last year. Now, many hotels are empty, cafes and restaurants are allowed to work with a workload of up to 50% on weekdays and only for delivery on weekends. Many simply do not survive in such conditions.
Firmanın işletmecisiyim. Tabii pandemi döneminde oturmalar...
Of course, as the seats in the cafe have decreased, food delivery does not cover our costs, and accordingly all this affects our work. Unfortunately, we had to let go many of our employees. Only God knows how long we will last delivering food, and at the moment the business of restaurants and cafes is in a deplorable state.
Paket servisiyle de tabii işletme ne kadar döner?
Tourists are welcomed here this year like never before. Due to the pandemic, many are abandoning travel altogether. Turkish government hopes to cope with the virus and the ensuing crisis with the help of vaccinations. Last year, the country made an order from China for 50 million doses. They plan to receive and use them before September this year. To date, Turkey has already received 50 million vaccinations. In addition, the authorities buy a European vaccine and develop their own. Without tourists, it's especially difficult for European countries now. In Spain, with bated breath, they are waiting for the upcoming vacation season and the fourth wave of coronavirus, which is likely to come sooner. Now the population is forbidden to move between cities, while tourists are allowed to do anything as long as they come. After all, Spain is suffering not so much from the disease itself as from the economic consequences of the pandemic. It has broken all possible unemployment brackets. The pace of vaccination is extremely slow. The only thing growing fast here is the number of infections and the general degree of public discontent. According to the OECD, Spain showed the highest unemployment rate among developed countries, 16%, while among young people this figure reaches almost 40%. The first year of the pandemic added more than 400,000 workers to the previous pre-COVID figure of unemployed, while almost 750,000 people faced the suspension of labor contracts or a significant reduction in working hours, receiving only part of the previous wages. Amid the pandemic, the number of illegal layoffs is on the rise. The organization which I worked from the moment of its foundation during pandemic decided to get rid of employees in an illegal way. But only thanks to the good work of the lawyers, filing an application with the court, I was able to achieve decent compensation. And by the way, my colleagues had to go the same way to protect their rights. It's hard to call this attitude towards loyal employees adequate, but as a rule, private business takes such measures out of despair. The high credit burden, insufficient support from the government, and the openly prohibitive policy of the local authorities are ruining successful enterprises that have been created over the years.
I
know of Russian entrepreneurs who had 4 restaurants in Barcelona. This is one of the most prestigious areas of Madrid. These entrepreneurs have been developing their business for 5 years, but after the pandemic, they had to close restaurants. And even in spite of the state support that was provided, it was impossible to repay the loans, and they had to close the business, selling everything they had and were able to make from this business.
Все, что они имели, заработав на этом бизнесе.
The media tries to reassure people against the backdrop of the active use of a British-Swedish vaccine that may lead to thrombosis. Representatives of the medical community are perplexed by the fact that the Russian drug is still not available to Spanish citizens. Behind the government's back, the Madrid authorities are negotiating the supply of this effective and safe vaccine to the region. Meanwhile, in Spain, there is still a ban on movement between regions, while the country does not interfere with the arrival of foreign tourists. French speech is often heard at the cafe tables in Santa Ana Square. The headlines in the local press says Madrid is overrun by Gauls or the new invasion of the French. This situation outrages the Spanish citizens because in order to travel to a neighboring region, they have to apply for a special permit, for example, to visit a doctor. So an appointment with a dentist in the coastal area is in high demand, and it helps to avoid a fine that reaches up to 10,000 euros. Even if you decide to go by car to your own summer cottage in a neighboring region, you will be fined 1,500 euros. The ban on movement at night from 11 p.m. till 6 a.m. was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. The minimum fine for such violation is 600 euros. Irritation with draconian fines is exacerbated by the authorities' sluggish actions to support key sectors of the economy. The tourism industry, which provides 15% of the GDP, has suffered the most, professional associations are sounding the alarm. If the borders are not opened by summer, no more than 30% of companies will survive. The trouble does not come alone. Cafes and restaurants, directly dependent on the flow of tourists, are massively ruined. Debt-laden assets pass into the hands of foreign investors from the US and Latin America. In the prestigious areas of Barcelona and Madrid, there is a hunt for hotels and restaurants. Apartments over 4 million euros are bought up in a matter of days. Musicians and artists whose talents and uplifting creativity provided invaluable support to society in the most difficult times were unjustifiably forgotten in the pandemic storm. In 2020, the Spanish music industry alone lost more than €1 billion. Given the low rates of vaccination and the expectation of a new fourth wave of the epidemic, the question arises about the elementary survival of the creative intellectuals.
Надо сказать, что в Европе 95%...
In Europe, approximately 95% of the artists work in the freelance format. We pay taxes monthly and live, let's say, with some kind of stability. But during the pandemic, unfortunately, we didn't receive any support. This is despite the fact that in my case, I paid €300 for 10 years and did not receive any help, support, anything.
И не получал ни копейки, ни в помощь, ни в поддержку, ничего.
The Spanish Association of Professional Musicians has revealed pandemic statistics in the area. 3 out of 4 professionals experienced a 90% reduction in activity. 1 in 3 has not yet received a single contract for their performance.
Я как музыкант могу сказать, что пандемия очень сильно повлияла.
As a musician, I can say that the pandemic has had a very strong impact. I canceled 24 concerts, and of course, my condition was very grave. In order not to get depressed, I decided to create an interview program called Victoria Talks.
Buenas tardes, queridos amigos. ¿Qué tal estáis? Otra vez les doy la bienvenida en el programa Victoria Talks. Como siempre, los martes.
Который называется «Виктория».
This way, we met with artists from different continents, Russian-speaking, Spanish-speaking. Artists began to get to know each other. This allowed us to form very interesting economic relations. Well, in addition to forming economic relations, we also have created couples. So I believe that you can never give up. You must always go forward and then hope for the best.
Никогда нельзя сдаваться, надо всегда идти вперед, а там будь что будет.
The coronavirus here has shown amazing patience, resilience, and discipline of the Spanish citizens. Having survived several waves of pandemic with fatal consequences for the economy, the society, rich in wonderful traditions, continues to fight for its rights and its usual way of life. All this time, the only direction remained open and safe for health of tourists from any country. Although it cannot be called affordable in any way, not everyone can afford a vacation in the Maldives. A piece of paradise in the Indian Ocean has remained largely untouched by the coronavirus, and it continued to receive travelers at a time when all the countries closed their borders and lived in a lockdown mode. Of the 500,000 native population, only 25,000 people managed to become infected with the new virus in a year. For a resort with such a huge flow of tourists, these are the best rates in the world. Preserving the safety of the paradise was achieved thanks to the prompt reaction and the ocean. It separated the sick islands from the healthy ones. Any movement from one piece of land to another is still prohibited for tourists. If someone, including local residents, floats to the hotel island from Big Malé, this is the capital of the Maldives, upon arrival, you will have to go to a 10-day quarantine.
В нашем острове-резорте все туристы ходят без масок, но сюда не могут.
On our resort island, all tourists go without masks, but they cannot get here without a negative PCR test. All staff wear masks, gloves, disinfect rooms twice a day. Disinfection machines are installed at every step all over the island. Sun loungers are disinfected several times a day.
Для того, чтобы мы легко могли помыть руки, обработать. В день несколько раз дезинфицируются шезлонги.
For the journalist Malika from Jarkent, this is an absolutely special vacation in a special company. The last time her grandmother flew on airplane was 35 years ago. And who could believe that the next flight will happen during the time of closed borders, a pandemic, and to such a distant direction from Kazakhstan? There was a little fear, but next to me was my granddaughter, who constantly supported me, held my hand, and somehow the fear went away. To fly to the Maldives, Malika and her grandmother had to pass a PCR test. Without a negative result, they are not allowed to board the plane in this direction. The procedure will have to be repeated before flying home. Tourists are obliged to do all this at their own expense. And if in Kazakhstan the prices are quite acceptable, the test costs about 7,000 tenge, then in the Maldives the same service costs several times more, from $80 to $120, depending on the island. But all this, as vacationers say, is worth peace of mind for your health and at least a week of life without the virus. I love that it's so quiet here. We saw squirrels, we saw bats, you can take pictures at the pier, all those high-speed boats, ships. I saw everything for the first time. I'm so happy.
Все мне пришлось увидеть впервые. Я такая довольная.
As in many other countries, the format of the buffet in Maldivian hotels has changed. For the entire vacation period, one permanent waiter is assigned to tourists. It's no longer possible to take food on your own. Each dish is served by a hotel employee. At the end of last year, the Maldives even received a tourism Oscar for the first time from the world-famous World Travel Awards, precisely because of the complete safety for the health of vacationers.
На экскурсии
We also go on excursions, only we do not go to other islands. We go on sea excursions with a small group of people. For example, my grandmother and I traveled only together, without other people. Only employees and only guides.
только гиды.
Now on 200 Maldives islands, there are only 8 hospitals with a total of 400 beds for patients with coronavirus, but they're only partially filled. Vaccination in Paradise began in February and has already reached almost half of the entire population. Currently, the Maldives government is considering various options to simplify the entry rules for tourists. Most likely, at the entrance, they will ask for so-called COVID passports.